From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Donald Trump is scheduled to be arraigned in Washington, D.C. Thursday on the latest charges against him for conspiracy to defraud the United States after the 2020 election. We'll talk about the fallout from Tuesday's indictment, plus the House Oversight Committee releases the full transcript of the testimony this week by Devon Archer, the former business partner of Hunter Biden. What does that testimony, now that we can see all of it, tell us about the Biden business dealings in Ukraine in 2014 and the role that then Vice President Joe Biden played? Welcome. I'm Paul Gigot with the Wall Street Journal opinion pages here on Potomac Watch, and I'm here with my colleagues Kyle Peterson and Kim Strassel. Welcome to you both. Let's start with the Trump indictment fallout 2 days removed from the filing of charges by special counsel Jack Smith with the approval of Attorney General Merrick Garland, which would be required for that indictment. Kyle, as you've examined things over the last 2 days, how does the indictment on the merits look to you now?
Well, the facts, I think, are damning, and I think I understand why people think in a karmic sense that this was the indictment that President Trump deserved. But the question, I think, is whether the laws fit this behavior. And the more that I look at it, the more skeptical I become. So one of the charges is obstructing an official proceeding. That is a charge that has been applied to some of the January 6 rioters and is relatively untested and is going up the appeals courts right now. There are questions about whether President Trump, for example, can really obstruct a political process that he is inside of. Isn't asking your vice president to do something in the Senate chamber, whether it's vote a certain way on a tie-breaking vote, isn't that basically core political behavior? I think that the electors, the phony electors, is maybe the best case that Jack Smith has.
When you think of the phony elector, just to elaborate for people, that's the attempt by Trump and some of his surrogates to get legislative officials and others in some key states, 7 states, to file a list of alternative electors who would have voted for Trump as opposed to Biden.
Correct. And the reason I say that I think that might be his best case is that there you have a distinction between speech and conduct. You have the campaign getting together to try to get these electors to cast bad faith official electoral certificates. But we talked about that a little bit on yesterday's podcast and got an email from a listener who said that we know that this is the indictment that Trump needed and that Jack Smith is not stretching the law. And I just don't think that's true. I think the question is, will people who feel that way after reading the facts in the indictment still feel that way if all of this stuff gets thrown out on appeal? And is that justice? And would that only strengthen President Trump if you have one of those jurors in D.C.? It is a D.C. jury, but if you have one juror who says, I've looked at all of the stuff that Trump said, at all the stuff that was presented at the trial, and it looks to me like he really believed that there was some fraud that he was fighting against, and so you can't get a conviction.
Well, we were highly critical, have been from the beginning, about what Trump was doing after the election, particularly since we've learned what he did with Mike Pence behind the scenes and some of the other things. Certainly deplorable behavior, but do these qualify as what I think it was Alexander Hamilton called political wrongs that need to be addressed politically through impeachment or through some actions of Congress, as opposed to criminal statutes? And it looks to me like a lot of these things are, as you say, essentially actions that Trump took in the context of his presidential duties. And there's a doctrine about absolute immunity for presidents acting in their presidential duties. The actions were wrong, they were destructive, but it seems to me it's a stretch to say that they are criminal. And that's where there'll be this contention, I think, about whether, there's no question in my mind that lobbying your vice president is part of your presidential duties, especially if you believe that the election was stolen and you think, hey, you can do this, even if we think he was wrong. The one thing that gives me a little pause is the electors question. But even there, I think you can argue if Trump, trying to preserve the integrity of elections, as he will assert he was doing, was within his presidential duties. And that's going to be one of the issues that's going to be contested here. Kim, how about you? What do you think here as you're looking at it?
Well, I was struck looking at some of Jack Smith's cheerleaders in the press and how even they are admitting that this is nowhere near as strong a case as what he brought with the classified documents one. I was reading a New York Times rundown of the suit this morning, and they noted that the problem here is that when it comes to Trump's effort to overturn the election, and that's what Smith is focused on, his actual efforts, not his falsehoods that he said out loud, but his efforts to overturn the election. The issue is there's no federal law specifically barring politicians from attempting to do something like that.
If there were a lot of, representatives would be in the slammer.
Busloads of them, yes. And so, but without such a law, what it means is that Smith had to use, and the New York Times actually used this word, a novel approach, which was to charge Trump with violating conspiracy laws, note that were not written to prevent the overturning of an election result. And so all of it in the end comes down to intent, as Kyle was saying. You have to be able to prove that someone was knowingly trying to deceive others if you want to prove a fraud. And that does not necessarily mean if you're out there just spouting all the nonsense in the world, but you genuinely believe that nonsense, you're not taking part in a conspiracy. And so we'll see what Jack Smith has. And that, I think, is going to be the interesting question. This article I was reading was bemoaning the fact that as far as all the reporting world knows, there is no tape anywhere of Donald Trump saying, I know I lost this election, but we need to do this anyway. They'll never catch me. Now, maybe he has it, but we haven't seen it.
On that point, let's listen to Bill Barr, the former attorney general under Trump, talk about that.
We're only seeing a tip of the iceberg on this.
You think Jack
indictment.
Smith has more?
Oh, yes. I would believe he has a lot more. And that's one of the things that impressed me about the indictment. It was very spare. And there were a lot of things he could have said in there. And I think there's a lot more to come. And I think they have a lot more evidence as to President Trump's state of mind.
Well, Kim, that's possible that
Sure.
they do, but you would assume that they do have some more evidence or some evidence in the indictment itself that Trump was told frequently that his claims of fraud that stole the election were wrong. But of course, he had others who were telling him
Right.
there was a lot of evidence.
That's why I think that's the weakest part of this. You can name all the people you want that told him he was wrong. But if he had one person who was telling him otherwise and he believed it, that could be what influenced his state of mind.
Right. And of course, deciphering the mind of Donald Trump, Kyle, is not an easy thing to do. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of contrary evidence that's brought up at trial.
Yeah, part of what makes this difficult to gauge is we don't know what else Jack Smith has. So one of the quotes on this point, I cited this one yesterday, is from former Trump aide Cassidy Hutchinson, who said she heard Trump say to his chief of staff, Mark Meadows, "I don't want people to know we lost. This is embarrassing. Figure it out." Notably, according to news reports, Mark Meadows has testified to the grand jury. There's another one, Alyssa Farah Griffin, former Trump aide, said she heard him say, "Can you believe I lost to this guy while watching Biden on TV?" There are also claims from Cassidy Hutchinson. She heard Trump say similar things to former Director of National Intelligence John Ratcliffe, who has also apparently, according to the news reports, testified to the grand jury. And so it's hard to know what direct evidence you have of Trump's state of mind. And I do think it would make for an interesting question for the defense. Are they going to argue that he truly believed the election was stolen and that was a delusional belief, but it was a truly held one? Or are they going to argue that the election was truly stolen, in which case they're going to get cross-examined on what basis they had for that, given the whole litany of credible people, including on Trump's campaign and in the Justice Department, who were telling him specifically otherwise, debunking these statements.
The other issue, apart from the legal merits, is the prudential argument for or against this indictment. My own view is that for prudential reasons, it should not have been brought because this will interfere directly into a presidential campaign. It will set a precedent one way or another, I think, risky for the presidency. And I would note that Bill Barr, who's obviously no admirer of the president and thinks the indictment on the documents case was legitimate, told CNN that I don't know if I would have approved this indictment in the sense that I may have exercised discretion and not gone forward with the case. Mostly I'm concerned about having this case going on during the election and diverting people's attention from the issues of the election. I'm also worried about the impact if there are acquittals during the campaign. Kim, the danger here for the campaign is that this will dominate the debate. right? Trump will be at the center of attention. His first trial on the hush money case now scheduled for March. The documents case for May, we don't know when this latest case will be heard, but it's clearly going to dominate the discussion. It's going to make it hard for any other Republican to get a public hearing for any ideas that the Republicans have. This election is going to be about Joe Biden's age and Hunter Biden on the one hand. And on the other hand, it's going to be about Donald Trump trying to stay out of jail and Donald Trump's trials.
No, I mean, listen to us right now. Look, we're obviously obliged to talk about this. It's very big news, but it means we're not talking about the latest things from Ron DeSantis or what Tim Scott said yesterday. And this is the wonder of it. If you are Donald Trump, is that it's lots of free advertising. He also is able to make the argument to the Republican electorate, look, and he's making it. He's saying, this isn't an attack on me. It's an attack on you. Are you going to let them get away with it? The only way to stop them from getting away with it is to make me the nominee, because they're trying to disqualify me from becoming the nominee. And so not only does it get him attention, but it gives him a very, I think, very powerful argument with the Republican electorate. Now, that's not necessarily true, meaning that the most important way Republicans would have of making sure that you depoliticize the Department of Justice and things like this don't happen is to win an election and to have Republican control of the federal government. And that regard, Donald Trump is still one of the weakest candidates you have because he's so divisive among so many independents and suburbanites, et cetera. But it still nonetheless is going to resonate with a lot of those Republican ears.
Yeah, the Republican voters, a lot of them, basically, if they conclude that this is political, and I think tens of millions of them do believe that these indictments are political, then they may conclude, and I think Trump is encouraging them to conclude, that the best way to say to the Biden Justice Department, go to hell, is to vote for Trump.
Right.
And there's a lot of them who will do that. And I don't think that's a healthy debate to have for the GOP when the Republicans ought to be debating who's better able to beat Biden, number one, and number two, who's better able to govern successfully if he does beat Biden.